My name is Palatine resident and occasional attendee of these meetings, not as often as I'd like to be, but that's another thing. Tonight, what I really wanted to just provide some feedback to the board on is the topic of communications. I know since the beginning of the year you had a communications firm come in and do an audit, and you've got communications and engagement strategy planning presentation, I think, planned after this. After the citizens address the board part of the agenda. And my topic on the communications is something that I have been in contact with certain members of the administration and the board recently, and that goes back to last month's meeting about the way in which I think there was a discussion about opening up a portal for the public to provide some questions that could be considered in today's session on the public hearing, which follows next. I posed the following questions. For those who may not be aware of the conversation, let me just go through them. I posed the 4 questions. One was, when was the portal opened? Okay, and for those of you who may not know what a portal is, it would be a special page on the website where you can submit some information electronically. The second question was, when was it closed? Next was, how was the availability of the portal promoted or publicized to the 100,000+ stakeholders that exist, that live in 211? And finally, how many questions were gathered? From the information provided back, the portal opened on August 17, which was 4 days after the board meeting, and I think that's pretty prompt. It closed on September the 4th in the afternoon. In terms of publication, there was nothing other than creating the portal on the website. There was no promotion of it, there was no contact with the media, there was no emails, and the portal, of course, didn't address the issue of people who don't have access to the internet who might want to provide a question back to the board in the same way. That being as it was, the portal existed, so technically it's open there, but I would say that maybe Unicom ARC might be able to comment on that as to whether that's a best practice. I think I'm a little bit disappointed, quite honestly. The content was fine in terms of saying to people, here's what you can do, but if you don't let people know that it's out there, and you, District 211 board and administration, you knew when you created the portal, we didn't, as the public, it would have really been beneficial to have been notified in one way or other on this. Finally, how many questions were provided? Anyone want to guess? 0. So I do have to ask, what did we achieve in terms of community engagement, in terms of sincerely wanting to gather feedback from those who could not make the meeting or didn't want to make the meeting and saw the portal, which was not a bad idea in terms of being able to gather stuff. I just wonder what we achieved. I think a golden opportunity to practice community engagement was lost. And I wonder, there's a presentation after this section this evening. I think it's called on the agenda, it's as item 3C. I just wonder if this experience that we've all encountered doesn't serve as a great case study as to how to improve. Thanks.
I would also like to talk about Unicom ARC. I spent considerable time in the last week just looking into who this company was. I heard Wheaton Warrenville mentioned several times by Unicom ARC, so I happened to call those people out there and ask them what they felt. The response I got was they felt that Unicom ARC had engineered questions to achieve a predetermined response. I know they have some union influence that's documented, and I would just like to caution the board, if you're going to hire this company for, I got the number of $60,000 would be the initial cost. Maybe we could take a different approach like District 54 did. I would just urge the school board to consider other options for that money, maybe make it more towards the kids and their education and things that they could use, seeing as that money is so tight nowadays and the economy doesn't seem to be doing as well as it should be. I think we could use that money better. This is a Citizens Advisory Committee plan for determining a long-term strategic plan. I'm not sure that Unicom ARC fits the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Vicki Wilson, 104 Wilson Court, Palatine, but I'm reading a statement on behalf of Mr. Joe Heater, who's a retiree in Palatine. He was unable to be here tonight because he had surgery today, so he asked me to read this statement. I come before the board speaking as a member of a group of citizens and stakeholders who reside in the district who are seldom heard from. That would be those of us who are over 65, retired, and living on a fixed income. While I cannot speak for anyone but myself, I do believe that my sentiments, based on interactions with many of my peers, are representative of our demographic. According to the most current census data, we represent over 10% of the village residents. That might not sound like a significant portion of the district residents, but if you consider the fact that over 25% of the village residents are under the age of 24, I would posit without fear of contradiction that we older residents support District 211 with our tax payments by more than a few orders of magnitude more than those in the 0 to 24 age group. I would ask you to consider the following three percentages: 68.9%, 27.6%, and 0%. The first number, 68.9%, is the increase in my personal property tax bill since 2004 for District 211. It does not include increases from any other taxing body. The second number, 27.6%, is the increase that I and my fellow retirees have seen in our Social Security benefit payments over the same period. The third, 0%, is the increase in retirement payments that I have seen from the company that was my employer for 29 years, a Fortune 100 company. Since I'm posing questions for the board in this presentation, here's another one for you to contemplate. Why did previous boards approve levies and budgets that exceeded the CPI by a factor of greater than 2? And secondly, will you continue this outrageous rate of increase in the budgets and levies that now are your responsibility? While some in our demographic might be able to get a bit of relief from circuit breaker legislation that address those at the lowest level of the income strata, most of us are caught in the middle, taking home a tiny bit too much to get any relief. Yet we are far from wealthy, and the continuing mismatch between tax increases from District 211 and District 15 for those who reside in Palatine is putting a significant dent in purchasing power. Keep in mind that we haven't been receiving 6% per year salary bumps during the last 4 years for our employment, or 3% annual increases in our retirement benefits like those in the public sector do. As you consider the upcoming budget and levy vote, and listen to the administrator's plea for a maximum allowable increase in the levy, you need to ask yourself how the proposed increases will affect a significant and more vulnerable segment of the community. Remember that you too, in the not too distant future, will be in that same demographic. Before you vote, ask yourself, what will happen to the district if for this year and maybe the next you hold the line and cast a no vote for an increase in the levy and the budget? Yes, the fund balances will shrink a bit, maybe even approach the levels that are called out in district policy. If you are going to enforce other policies that govern the district, then you should enforce the one that sets district reserves. Since we are a country governed by law and not the whims of man, our elected representatives should set the example for the students of the district and comply with the official policy. Board members, I urge you to cast your vote for fiscal responsibility. The overtaxation that has occurred is unjust and is placing a burden on the members of the community who can least continue to bear that burden. Thank you, Joe Heater.
Thank you very much.
Take one of this pass it on to the rest of the board members. Thanks. Okay, I'm back. First of all, per the information, I've got a letter to read on behalf of Steve Bourne, who's a neighbour of mine. that he's unable to attend tonight. Just by way of background, he's a chief financial officer of a pharmaceutical company, so he's got extensive financial and budgeting experience. His letter to the board reads as follows. I'm writing this letter in hopes it will be read at tonight's public hearing on the budget. As a Palatine resident for the past 7 years, I'm concerned by the combination of high and growing cash reserves and the annual board ritual of seeking the maximum tax increase allowed. Of particular concern is the substantial excess of cash reserves over your own board and district policy. At June 30, 2015 and 14, respectively, reported fund balances were 50 million and 90 million over the cash target. Taxpayers have faithfully supported school spending for our children, but asking us to continue to pad cash reserves by requesting yet another maximum allowable tax rate demonstrates a reckless lack of financial discipline by the district and is both unjustified and unfair to taxpayers. The cash surplus trend over the past years supports no increase in tax this year, and I'll ask you to vote accordingly. Sincerely, Steve Bourne. Okay, thanks. Some copies out of the chart that there's a chart, Wayne. We're going to take that. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to talk on behalf of myself if I can. This really relates to the topic. I'm going to refer to the chart that I passed out, but just a few opening comments. Part of this is part of a conversation I've had with the board over the past week. Over the last few years, when the annual budget, when the tax levy review has come up for vote, we have 3 new board members this year who haven't voted on budget or on the tax levy. But of the other 4 incumbents, only 2 people have ever voted against the tax increase. Okay, on that, and those were minority votes, so therefore the increase carried. Okay, each year the tax increase sought has been the maximum allowable under the law, and if one looks at things, it's if one correlates this with one of the budget parameters disclosed at last month's meeting. One of the strategies was to safeguard the fund balance. My question up front is going to be, when does safeguarding become hoarding? Okay, I'd like to refer you guys, if you've got copies of this chart, and to the members of the board, and specifically, this is extracted from public financial data that you put out there. And probably the most important thing to indicate on this, for the purposes of this discussion and this tech budget hearing, is to look at the figures from about June 2012 onwards. Okay, the green line that I inked in at the bottom of this chart is at the $140 million cash balance. Okay, what that means, if you look at the chart, if you look at the chart lines from 2012 onwards, at no stage has the cash available to the administration to pay teachers' salaries, pay rent, utilities, run the budget, ever dipped below $140 million. Okay? When you consider that this year and the past few years we've been running an annual operating budget of between 200 and 210 million, 140 represents somewhere between 60 to 67% of next year's operating expenses. When the board target is a minimum of 33%, and one wants to safeguard that, which I actually agree with, when you get to the 60 to 67%, that's why I asked the question earlier, when does safeguarding become hoarding? Okay? Because I think this picture clearly demonstrates that the need in the past to go to the maximum increase on the property tax increase is unwarranted by the facts that are represented in the cash balance. Okay? And so tonight I'm going to ask you, as board members, to take a good look at the facts behind this. We heard a statistics teacher talk about numbers telling stories. There's a story here. I'm not certain you may have seen it beforehand, but you do have today, it's the 17th of September. The 30th of September is the deadline for you to submit your tentative budget under Illinois Code. There is time to go back and run a budget which would show the impact of zero tax increase and submit that. and carry that forward later on when it comes to the tax levy submission to a zero tax levy increase. If anyone would like to disprove that the cash balances here are more than safe to keep this school district doing its mission of educating the children in our community, I'd be happy to engage in an interactive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'd have to say that I wouldn't have much to add to Len's discussion there. I think he was pretty thorough. And it would be nice if the board could respond so we would know if the information that he presented to it was in fact accurate. But I'd like to add maybe just 2 quick points to that. The school board here in District 211 has a 33% minimum. And that's good. The state guideline is 25%. So you're even above that. And with all that considered, you're still $50 million plus. I think what that means, and Anna's asked me a few times, what does that mean to the average taxpayer? That's approximately 20% of our tax bill. I think that's a significant number. I think that could be considered by the school board when they vote on it, if they should raise the levy again. I'm concerned that when anybody, even a member of the public, has too much money, it tends to get spent on things that may be nice to have, but aren't necessary. So I hope that you take what Len said seriously and really consider that, because people in the community, especially the older people, the poorer people, they get hit the hardest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.